conference, he's kind of all shucks. He was like, oh, said the perfect thing and was like, I'm just happy to be here. I'm going to let my play do the talking. When it's all said and done, we can revisit that conversation. But Brock Purdy kind of has a pattern of when he's asked about things that he doesn't like in the press conference. For example, hey, you didn't throw deep. Then the next team comes out and throws the ball deep and to do that. Do you think that we'll see a more motivated Brock Purdy in this next game? And do you think he's worthy of being in that MVP conversation?
Yeah, to me, MVP is well. I'll start with the first portion before the MVP. I think this week, I don't think there's too much of a difference. I mean, you talk about the Arizona Cardinals. This is a team the 49ers faced earlier in the year, really cooked them offensively. They scored, I believe, 35 points, won 35-16 earlier in the year. That was with Josh Dobbs at the helm. This time it's Kyler Murray at the helm. But the Cardinals, not one of the best teams in the NFL. And you look at their defense and you see matchups that the 49ers can exploit, both on the ground and in the air. You've also seen Brock Purdy continue to grow as the season goes along, specifically following the bye week. You're seeing a couple of strong weeks put together and things like that. And so I do think that you're going to see a confident Brock Purdy, especially when he's going back to his home state and playing in that arena, I believe, for the first time in his career. And so that'll be another cool aspect for Brock Purdy. Excited to see how that game kind of goes along. And then as for the MVP conversation, to me, MVP is an interesting thing.
Think about that, because he did say he got his family and some close friends tickets, but he also said he knows a lot of people that are getting themselves tickets to go. So
Yeah. I mean, one of Arizona's, finest probably in the NFL at the moment. But MVP conversation, I think when you talk about it, MVP to me is an intriguing award because what is it based on? It's based on someone's resume over an entire course of the season. It's also based on how well their team performed and how impactful they were to their team's success. So basing on those aspects, right? Well, look at Brock Purdy's statistics. He plays the most important position, and he's top five in several important statistical categories. I mean, miles
not
ahead in
even
yards
top
per
five. He's like
attempt.
number one in like all of them.
Yeah, he's number one in a good portion, right? I mean, top five. I'm just saying that, just cause, but number one in yards per attempt by a mile. I mean, he when you look at the numbers, you look at the success for the team, you can understand why you're putting Brock Purdy in the conversation. I mean, if you're talking about quarterback specifically, Brock Purdy, Dak Prescott, Lamar Jackson, probably, maybe even Patrick Mahomes in there. I think, you see a trend. And I think, why are people not giving Brock the MVP? That question. Well, first, actually, I want to hear your thoughts on it, and then I'll answer that.
Just really quick, I wanted to, because I'm usually not a numbers girl, but I found this like statistic pretty interesting. And while you're talking about being number one in categories, when I was looking up for this upcoming game and trying to see, okay, like where would Arizona have any sort of chance? When I was looking into, Brock Purdy has a lower passer rating when he's away versus at home by like a lot. And so I was like, oh, okay, well, that could be concerning. But then I was looking at it, and Brock Purdy, not only is he 7-0 against the NFC West, but also his passer rating goes from like 140 something to 106, which is still like number one by far. Like even in his own category where he's like, you're like, okay, that's like a 40-point difference. That's like a really big deal and bad. Even his bad, quote unquote bad, is like miles ahead of the next good guy, which is just so impressive. Um, why is he not? I mean, to be fair, I is it and maybe this is wrong, but I think it all comes down to draft status. Um, just because I can't see if Brock Purdy was drafted, if not to bring up Trey Lance, but just to like set up the argument, if this was the number 3 overall pick and people had expectations that he was going to perform well, if Trevor Lawrence was putting up Brock Purdy's numbers, I don't think it would be a question between him and Dak, just because the story would be like, this franchise went out and they got this guy. Now he's, everyone thought he was going to be top 3, a really great quarterback, and now he's performing like a really great quarterback. That kind of confirmation bias, I think, would like propel Brock Purdy to be obviously the MVP, where I think he still gets a lot of detractors. And I understand their arguments, and we'll get into Cam Newton's comments later, but I understand the comments of having an excellent coach, having playmakers, yak, all that. But I think people have done a really great job at breaking down that just last year, Patrick Mahomes had more yards after the catch than Brock Purdy has now. For the last 5 MVPs, the quarterbacks have actually had a higher YAC percentage than Brock Purdy has now. Even though Brock Purdy is slightly higher than average, it seems that any quarterback that is performing this well and getting these statistics that is then considered for the MVP also has really great playmakers around him. Same thing when we're talking about last year, Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid. I mean, I think a lot of people would say he's better, or just as good as Kyle Shanahan. And those things don't take away from Patrick Mahomes' talent or his MVP case. Now, maybe it's just because when you're watching the game, he really stands out. But I would say a lot of people aren't watching 49ers game this year because when you're watching the 49ers game, I think Brock Purdy stands out as an excellent playmaker. I think he's been utilizing his legs. I think a lot of times the pocket will break down. He'll scramble, get a throw off down, throwing down the field. I think potentially people are seeing what he did last year when they already were like, okay, who is this guy? He's, the last pick. This has to be the system. And maybe using previous games as a way to confirm what they already thought. Because I think if you've watched him this year, you've seen him grow, and he is a pivotal point of why this team is successful. And if the MVP award, quarterback's the most valuable position, what's the best team in the NFL? 49ers. To me, it's shouldn't be that difficult of an argument. And I think that a lot of the pushback is simply because of his draft status and people not really wanting to be wrong and waiting for that shoe to drop.
Cool take. I mean, I think that's an intriguing point. My take is a little different, but on a similar landscape that you do see people, trying to kind of diminish it. Brock Purdy's kind of skills and things like that are really his accomplishments, because the MVP award isn't necessarily like the most skilled player. It's just who was the most valuable player of their team playing the most valuable position this past season.
It's not even that, right? It's like quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, MVP is pretty much quarterback. You don't really see the offensive player of the year is what you see skill position players win defense for any defensive player. But on the quarterback outlook, I think there are two key reasons why Brock Purdy probably doesn't get, the recognition that he deserves in the MVP race. One, it's because of his teammate, Christian McCaffrey, who I think is the 49ers MVP right now. If you were going to put it on offense, I think that Christian McCaffrey has the better argument, personally, just because I think he provides the biggest, if you're talking about most valuable, I think he provides the biggest impact for the 49ers offensively as a skill position player or as a quarterback. Go ahead.
Can I ask you? So I feel like you and I maybe even had a stream where, and I was on this level. I was like, Christian McCaffrey is MVP of the 49ers. I think even at one point, Kyle Shanahan said that he thought Christian McCaffrey was the MVP of the team. But the last 2 weeks, I felt like the emergence of Deebo Samuel kind of took away from Christian McCaffrey's like case, in the same way that if it was like, if you're looking at the league, if all of a sudden Josh Allen like went the hell off, that would take away from Brock Purdy's case. To me, Deebo Samuel going off, it kind of, I was like, okay, like I think in the last 2 games, Deebo has been the most impactful player. And if you're gonna give it to a running back who already has a less valuable position, to me, he would have to by far be the best player on the team every single week. He couldn't have multiple weeks where he wasn't the standout player. And so because Deebo emerged, I'm like, okay, that kind of takes away from Christian McCaffrey. But Deebo's not, if you look at the season, he's definitely not. So then that to me built Brock Purdy's case more, because you're like, okay, well, who's giving them the ball? It's him. So did the emergence of Deebo change your opinion, or do you still think that even in the last couple games, maybe Deebo statistically went off, but that was because of the stuff that Christian McCaffrey opened up? Because I know when you look at that Eagles game, to me, I'm like, this was a clear Deebo game. James Bradbury, maybe just because he was being shady, or maybe he was being honest after the game, said the reason the 49ers were so successful was because of Christian McCaffrey, even though when you just look at statistically, that was a bigger Deebo game. When asked why was that game so difficult, why did you lose, James Bradbury said it all comes down to Christian McCaffrey and how he affects our game plan. So
I think that's absolutely the reason why. Dating back to when Christian McCaffrey joins the field, it's not just what Christian McCaffrey puts up statistically, and this is probably where I differ from other if I was an MVP voter, I differ from others in that I'm talking about who I believe provides the most value to their team in that sense. Now, I understand it's a quarterback type of position, and I actually agree that Purdy probably has the higher odds than McCaffrey to win the award, given the quarterback value to the position. But when you talk about most valuable to me, when you look at the way defenses react to Christian McCaffrey in both aspects of the field, you understand how he makes this offense move. In the receiving game, where Christian McCaffrey arguably makes his bigger impact, you see how defenders gravitate to him, and that's what allows these different seams between the second and third levels to open up for other opportunities because you see the way that defenses try and approach McCaffrey. Am I saying this happens on every play? No, but it happens. When you see it, there are certain trends that you see continuing to happen because you can't just allow Christian McCaffrey to get open underneath or in the short intermediate range of the field. That's something that teams just don't allow, understanding what McCaffrey can do, turning, a 3-yard play into a 40-yard play. Now, I understand your point. Deebo Samuel has turned it up. Since his injury, since coming back from the bye week, Deebo Samuel has been elite. He has been to his 2021 levels, potentially even more. His explosiveness looks returned. It looks like it's returned. Things like that. He looks really good. And so when you have four really good weapons, I can understand the diminished value of one, especially when you don't play the quarterback position. But the reason that I go with McCaffrey is just because of the way that he defenses gravitate to him. And when you hear other defenders, like you said, James Bradbury, say what they believe about the 49ers offense, a lot of them will point to the way McCaffrey gravitates that offense as the reason kind of for their success.
I like that. I wonder, I wish you could give Kyle Shanahan truth serum, because in the press conference, he was asked about Christian McCaffrey's case, and he went off and gave kind of a whole little speech about how he thought that Christian McCaffrey deserved to be in the MVP conversation. And I want to say that was at the very least 2 weeks ago now. But then this week he was re-asked about it, but he was asked about Christian McCaffrey and Brock Purdy. And then he was like, well, I don't want to get myself in trouble because both of these guys are on my team. But then he kind of did what you just did, where he talked about all the value that Christian McCaffrey brings to the team in ways and he talked about not only all of his production, but in all the ways that you don't see, in the way that he opens up every player on the field, in the way that he allows Brock Purdy to be successful. And then he was like, but the MVP award is, usually goes to a quarterback. And if you're looking statistically, then Brock Purdy kind of deserves it. And it's just kind of funny, the amount of time he spent kind of making each player's case. I did feel like he gave Christian McCaffrey a little bit of a nod right there, even though he kind of tried not to. He was like, oh, I don't want to, favor one over the other. But
no, yeah. And do I have do I care if one or the other wins it? No, I don't think anybody would really care. I think that both have very valid arguments to give it. The reason that I brought that up is because I'm trying to imagine why other people are not going with Brock Purdy as the MVP. I think that that's one of the reasons. The second reason is I just think that they see all the weapons around him, and then they value that compared to other offenses and believe that Brock Purdy's being uplifted by his system and his weapons, which I think now has become more of a fallacy argument, but I still think that's the belief of some. Whereas if you look at other,
wouldn't that
I know.
Being valuable because he's cheaper? The reason that they can do that is because
I don't think that they put contracts in to most valuable. So it might be valuable to the team, but player in the NFL, I think that's different. And so I'm just trying to see why other people may not. Because when you compare him to potentially the other three that I mentioned as potential MVP candidates, Dak Prescott probably has the best weapons because he's got a really good wide receiver one in CD Lamb. He's got some solid weapons outside of that, but still doesn't compare to the 49ers. You talk about the Baltimore Ravens. I mean, Lamar Jackson, his weapons, Zay Flowers, Mark Andrews is out, so it's Zay Flowers, Odell Beckham. I don't think that those guys compare to what the 49ers have at all. And then obviously Kansas City, it's Travis Kelce, and then a bunch of players who have the potential to play well, but it's a bunch of unproven weapons. Yeah, I mean, Rashee Rice is kind of breaking out, but it's unproven weapons there. So that's kind of, I think, the argument people might go to if the race is close between some of these guys to where you pick one over the other.
I agree with that. I feel like we should